I would say two things in addition to agreeing to what you said. So that, yes, but two further points. One is that the middle classes can take an intelligent interest in it only when the facts on the ground are very much clearer. I regard the middle classes in India or anywhere else to be basically sympathetic. But if you are told that the government can't do anything, so don't worry about it, it's a nice thought, but really don't bother your pretty head, quote unquote, all that, then you get a reason. I mean, the cynicism of, sorry, what I call the smartness of cynicism, that nothing can be done.
That's right.
So that's very big, and that's why, in addition to pointing out how dreadful the situation is, we are pretty concerned with pointing to the fact that we can do things. Things have happened. Yesterday I was giving people always point out that the government can solve famines in a democracy, which is something we have been discussing for a very long time, and very often attributed to what I was writing 50 years ago. But there are many other things. I mean, India was thought to have been likely, almost certainly we were told, the main center of AIDS epidemic. Didn't happen. Because that actually made the middle classes also very wide. I was privileged to write the introduction to a collection of fiction writing with the AIDS team by some of our leading fiction writers. It was very interesting for me to see the engagement of fiction writers on a really public utility question. And I think it indicated the extent to which that consciousness had gone through. And it was effective. So my hope is that if the education and healthcare gets that, similar thing would happen. What can happen, administration, accountability, are not independent of what we want, and especially what the powerful people want. So I think so that's one point to make. And the other point to make, which I feel quite strongly about, since I'm very strongly pro-reform, and indeed I would like more reform in many ways. That question came up in yesterday's discussion. Were you there yesterday?
No, I watched on TV.
Okay,
I
don't know how much was shown in TV. But somebody was asking about labor legislation and so on, and minimum wages. So my guess is that the minimum wages probably does do some good. On the other hand, there's a lot of labor legislation which doesn't do any good, even for the labor themselves. And I think those reforms are needed, but combined with the health and education thing. And I think while at one side you see the anger of the middle classes who have gone ahead with wasting time with the government operations, there's that deep skepticism. And I get often attacked for that reason. There's the other side, there's a lot of people among the less privileged who think that the reforms haven't done any good, and they blame the reform. But the basic story is, I think, that the reforms could have been successful, partly if it's carried fully, and I think Manmohan did a pretty good job of that, but as much as possible at that time, and it could have been pursued further. But there are political constraints on that. But the political constraints are not independent of the frustration of a lot of the public with what they think is the folly of liberalization. Mistakenly they think that. Or folly of globalization, that's another mistake. Globalization is responsible for any of our problems. On the other hand, we have to do things in order to make globalization to work for the interest of all, and liberalization for the interest of all. So the failure of the governments to carry through the second part of the agenda, namely education, healthcare, it led to a situation of which this book is an attempt to present systematic data, but in an unsystematic way. People know about these things.
Right.
They know the difficulties of there being not good schools. And so the failure of the second part is sometimes mistakenly identified with the failure of the first part. So you have a bit of a dialogue of the deaf when the relatively prosperous middle classes don't adequately recognize. No, I believe that they would if all the data were presented to them.
And that is your attempt to do through this book.
That address. But the other address is, which is the other side, that don't blame liberalization for something which arises from not liberalization, but the failure of the supplement to liberalization. Or the second part, I won't call it supplement, but the second part of the thing. And this is unfortunate, because those who want more liberalization, in which I would count myself, immediately treat you as an enemy because you're wanting the other thing. Whereas actually it's the other thing that makes liberalization viable in a democratic society, because that makes people's lives go better, and they can understand that liberalization is compatible not only with business expansion, but also with better lives of people, provided the state did these various other things. Now, when the state doesn't do it, then first of all, people's lives go badly. Secondly, I think the growth potentials are very badly affected as part of the team. Nothing as important as having an educated, healthy labor force for sustained economic growth. But thirdly, in a democratic context, it generates a lot of frustration and misdiagnosed attack on reform, when what they're really complaining about is not reform.
Not enough reform.
Not only not enough, but not enough positive things on what the state ought to do in education and healthcare. But where the debate goes off, because those who want reform, some of them would not want to do anything about education and healthcare, partly for ideological reasons, because they have convinced themselves that the state can't do any good at all. This is a very non-Adam Smithian view, because he always wanted this balance. And as a result, they end up being somewhat counterproductive, because every attempt, and since I get a lot of the attack, I'm very familiar, that every time we talk about public school, the need for state school, and states more health care by the public sector, we get attacked saying, well, I'm going to try, I'm going to overturn liberalization. Whereas in fact liberalization is viable only with these additional things that the state ought to do.